Story time, folks. Let me tell you about the craziest summer of my life in good old Willow Creek. It's a small town where everybody knows everybody, and we're famous for our summer solstice festival. It's usually the highlight of our year, but this time it turned my world upside down. I'm Dave Johnson, and my wife Sarah and I live on Maple Street, right next to our good friends, the Thompsons. We've always been a tight-knit bunch, sharing barbecues and watching each other's kids. Life was simple and sweet, or so I thought. This year's Solstice Festival was in full swing, and I was excited to surprise Sarah. She'd been working late a lot, so I figured I'd show up unannounced and sweep her off her feet. Man, was I in for a shock. I walked into the town square, all decked out with twinkling lights and a giant TV prop for some reason. The music was loud, people were laughing, and I was feeling good. That's when I saw it, a flash of Sarah's red dress behind the TV. My heart racing, I thought, perfect, I'll sneak up and surprise her. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. Sarah wasn't alone. She was with Mike, her coworker, and they were, well, let's just say they weren't discussing work. I couldn't believe my eyes. My Sarah, my wife of 10 years, was in the arms of another man. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. You should have seen her face when she saw me. Her eyes went wide, and she actually tried to hide behind the TV. Can you believe it? Like a kid caught stealing cookies, she thought she could just disappear. I stood there, my mind spinning. Anger bubbled up inside me, mixed with a deep, aching hurt. This was supposed to be a fun night, a sweet surprise. Instead, it turned into the beginning of my own personal bedtime story nightmare. As Sarah stumbled out from behind the TV, all I could think was, how did we get here? What happens now? Little did I know, this was just the start of a wild ride that would shake up not just our marriage, but the whole town of Willow Creek. The next few days were a blur of tears, shouting, and sleepless nights. Sarah tried to explain, but her story just didn't add up. She claimed Mike had forced her into that situation. But I couldn't shake the image of her willingly in his arms. It felt like every word out of her mouth was a lie, and my trust in her crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. Our once happy home became a battleground. Simple things like making breakfast or watching TV together now felt like walking on eggshells. I'd catch myself staring at Sarah, wondering if I ever really knew her at all. This wasn't how I imagined my bedtime story of a perfect marriage would go. The worst part? Everyone in Willow Creek seemed to know. I'd catch neighbors whispering when I walked by, their eyes full of pity. It made my skin crawl. Our friends, the Thompsons, tried to help, inviting us over for dinner like old times. But the atmosphere was tense, and I couldn't help but notice how Sarah would barely look at me across the table. Speaking of the Thompsons, I started noticing something odd about them too. Tom, my buddy since high school, began acting all jumpy and suspicious. At first, I thought he was just uncomfortable around Sarah and me, given our situation. But then I realized his eyes were always darting to the house next door. That's when I remembered Jake, the new guy who'd moved in a couple of months ago. Suddenly, it clicked. Every time I saw Lisa Thompson lately, she was chatting with Jake over the fence or bumping into him on her morning jog. One night, as we sat on our porch trying to have a civil conversation, I overheard Lisa talking to Tom. "Jake's just like a male version of me," she laughed. "We have so much in common." I saw Tom's face fall, and my heart went out to him. Was history repeating itself? Was my best friend about to go through the same hell I was living? As I sat there, watching the sun set on another day in Willow Creek, I couldn't help but wonder, what happened to our simple, happy lives? How did our picture-perfect marriages turn into this complicated mess? Little did I know, this story time was far from over, and Willow Creek had more surprises in store for all of us. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong in our little corner of Willow Creek. One evening, while I was trying to fix our creaky porch swing, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off Sarah, I overheard Lisa Thompson talking on her phone in her backyard. I know, she was saying in a hushed voice. I kind of hope Jake moves away soon. It would make things easier." My stomach dropped. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I knew exactly what Tom must be going through. That gnawing feeling that something's not right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Emotional cheating, they call it. Sometimes I think it hurts even more than what Sarah did. I wanted to rush over and tell Tom what I'd heard, but how could I? My own marriage was in shambles. Who was I to give advice? Plus, I couldn't help but wonder if I was just seeing problems everywhere because of my own situation. Meanwhile, the summer solstice party drama had become Willow Creek's favorite bedtime story. Everywhere I went, I could feel eyes on me, hear the whispers. "Poor Dave," they'd say, not quite quietly enough. "Did you hear what Sarah did?" It was suffocating. Sarah and I could barely leave the house without feeling like we were on display. The Thompsons weren't faring much better. Tom looked more stressed every day, and Lisa just looked guilty. Then, as if things weren't complicated enough, old Mrs. Henderson started spreading a wild story at her weekly bingo night. According to her, Willow Creek was under a curse of the solstice. She claimed that every few decades, the summer solstice festival would bring chaos to the marriages in town. At first, I laughed it off. A curse? Really? But as I lay awake at night, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside me and wondering if she was dreaming of Mike, I couldn't help but wonder. Was there something to this curse business? Had some ancient magic turned our lives upside down? I know it sounds crazy, but in a town like Willow Creek, where the lore is as old as the hills, sometimes the line between reality and folklore gets a little blurry. And let me tell you, as I watched the moon rise over our little town that night, I felt like I was living in a story. A complicated, messy, heartbreaking story that I didn't know how to end. Little did I know, this tale was about to take an even wilder turn. But that's the thing about stories, isn't it? Just when you think you know where they're going, they surprise you. And Willow Creek? Well, it had plenty of surprises left in store for all of us. Just when I thought this story couldn't get any more complicated, Willow Creek threw us another curveball. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon and I was mowing my lawn, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. That's when I heard a commotion from the Thompsons' house. Tom burst out the front door, his face a mix of relief and embarrassment. Behind him came Lisa, Jake, and was that Jake's mother? They were all laughing and hugging. I stood there, grass clippings sticking to my sweaty arms, completely confused. Tom saw me and jogged over, a sheepish grin on his face. "Dave, you're not going to believe this," he said, shaking his head. "Jake? He's Lisa's cousin. Her long-lost cousin." I must have looked like a fish out of water, my mouth opening and closing without a sound. Tom explained that Jake's mother was Lisa's aunt, who'd lost touch with the family years ago. They'd reconnected through one of those ancestry websites, and Jake had moved to Willow Creek to get to know his newfound family. As I watched Tom's face, I could see him wrestling with his emotions. He was relieved, sure, but also ashamed. He'd let jealousy cloud his judgment, seeing threats where there were none. It made me wonder about my own situation. Had I jumped to conclusions too quickly with Sarah? Speaking of Sarah, things between us were still as rocky as the cliff path down to Willow Creek Beach. Every time we tried to talk about what happened, her story would change a little. First, Mike had forced her. Then, she'd had too much to drink. Then, it was a moment of weakness because she felt neglected. Each new version chipped away at my trust, leaving me feeling lost and alone in my own home. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like interrogations. I'd catch myself analyzing her every word, looking for inconsistencies. It was exhausting. One night, after another failed attempt at talking things through, Sarah surprised me. "Dave," she said, her voice small and vulnerable, "I think we need help. Real help." I nodded, too tired to argue. That's when Sarah suggested we visit old Mabel, the town elder. Now, in any other place, going to see the local wise woman might seem strange. But this is Willow Creek, where folklore and reality dance a fine line. Old Mabel lived in a cozy cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden that always seemed to be in bloom, no matter the season. As we walked up her winding path, hand in hand for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The old woman greeted us with knowing eyes and a gentle smile. "I've been expecting you," she said, ushering us inside. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and something else, magic, maybe? As we settled into her overstuffed chairs, I couldn't help but think, what a story this will make someday. But right then, in that moment, All I cared about was whether this wise old woman could help us write a new chapter in our own bedtime story, one where trust could be rebuilt and love could heal all wounds. Little did I know, old Mabel had more than just wisdom to offer. She had a tale of her own to tell, one that would change everything we thought we knew about love, trust, and the magic of Willow Creek. As Sarah and I sat in old Mabel's cozy living room, surrounded by the scent of chamomile tea and ancient books, the elder leaned forward in her rocking chair, her eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "You're not the first to come to me with a broken heart," she began, her voice as smooth and rich as honey. "Let me tell you a story, one that's been passed down through generations in Willow Creek." And so, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, old Mabel spun a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption that happened right here in our town over 100 years ago. She told us about a couple, just like us, torn apart by mistrust and jealousy. But instead of letting it destroy them, they turned to the town for help. "You see," Mabel said, fixing us with her piercing gaze, "in Willow Creek, we believe in the power of community to heal wounds of the heart." As she spoke, I felt Sarah's hand slip into mine. I squeezed it gently, feeling a spark of the connection we'd lost. "Now," Mabel continued, a smile playing on her lips, "I think it's time for a little Willow Creek magic. We have an old ritual, passed down through the years. It's said to cleanse negative energy and rebuild trust." She described a ceremony involving herbs from her garden, moonlight, and the support of the entire town. It sounded crazy, like something out of a fairy tale. But sitting there holding Sarah's hand, I was ready to try anything. Word spread fast in Willow Creek. Before we knew it, the whole town was rallying around us. They organized potluck dinners, dance nights, even a couples retreat in the woods. It wasn't just for us and the Thompsons anymore. Other couples started joining in, sharing their own struggles and fears. I remember one night during a town bonfire, watching couples all around us talking, really talking, maybe for the first time in years. There was Joe and Mary from the bakery, working through their communication issues. The Petersons from down the street, rekindling their romance after years of taking each other for granted. It was like a dam had broken. All these perfect-seeming marriages in our picture postcard town suddenly revealed their cracks, but instead of falling apart, they were being carefully, lovingly repaired. As for Sarah and me, each event, each conversation felt like a small step towards healing. We laughed together for the first time in months during a 3-legged race at the town picnic. We cried together, really cried, during a couples therapy session in the community center. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I thought we'd never get past the hurt, never rebuild the trust we'd lost. But then I'd catch Sarah's eye across a crowded room, or feel her hand slip into mine as we walked home under the stars, and I'd feel that spark of hope again. Through it all, old Mabel watched over us like a benevolent guardian, offering advice, brewing mysterious teas, and preparing for the big ritual that was to come. As the day of the ceremony approached, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would this magical ritual really work? Could it heal the wounds in our marriage, in our community? I didn't know it then, but that ceremony would become the stuff of Willow Creek legend, a bedtime story told for generations to come. But more importantly, it would be the turning point in our own story, a chapter filled with magic, hope, and the power of love and community. Little did I know, the biggest challenge and the greatest miracle was yet to come. As the days went by, Sarah and I found ourselves on a roller coaster of emotions, each turn bringing new challenges and unexpected insights. Old Mabel's words echoed in my mind, "Healing starts from within." At first, I thought it was just another piece of fortune cookie wisdom, but boy, was I wrong. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on our porch swing, the same one I'd been fixing when this whole mess started, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Dave," she whispered, "I'm scared. Scared of being hurt. Scared of hurting you. I've been keeping parts of myself locked away for so long." It hit me then. Sarah's betrayal wasn't just about Mike or that night at the Solstice Festival. It was about years of built-up fears and insecurities that we'd both ignored. As she opened up, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had been my constant companion started to melt away, replaced by a deep, aching compassion. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It was about choosing to love despite the pain, about giving both of us a chance to grow and heal. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. Some days the hurt would come rushing back and I'd want to build walls around my heart. But each time, I made the choice to stay open, to keep trying. Meanwhile, the Thompsons were on their own journey. Tom and I would often chat over the fence, sharing our struggles and victories. "You know," he told me one day, "Lisa and I have started having these honesty hours where we just lay everything out on the table. It's terrifying, but man, it feels good to finally talk about stuff we've been bottling up for years." I watched as our quiet, reserved neighbors transformed. They started holding hands in public, laughing more, looking at each other with a newfound appreciation. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. As for Sarah and me, we had our work cut out for us. We started seeing a counselor in town, learning to communicate in ways we never had before. Sarah confronted her fear of vulnerability, slowly letting down the walls she'd built around her heart. And me? I learned that true strength isn't about never getting hurt. It's about having the courage to love again after you've been wounded. Before we knew it, another year had almost passed, and the summer solstice was approaching once more. The whole town was buzzing with excitement about old Mabel's cleansing ritual. People would stop us on the street, offering words of encouragement or sharing their own stories of relationship struggles and triumphs. The night before the solstice, Sarah and I sat in our backyard, looking up at the stars. "Can you believe it's been a year?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "Feels like a lifetime," I replied, wrapping my arm around her. And in a way, it had been. We weren't the same people who'd walked into old Mabel's cottage all those months ago. We'd been broken down and rebuilt, stronger in the broken places. As we sat there, I could feel the anticipation building in the air. Tomorrow, we'd participate in old Mabel's ritual, along with the Thompsons and what seemed like half the town. What would happen? Would it really cleanse away the last of our pain and mistrust? I didn't know what to expect, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real, solid hope, blooming in my chest. Whatever happened tomorrow, we'd face it together, not just as a couple, but as part of this crazy, wonderful community we called home. Little did I know, the solstice had one last surprise in store for us, a twist that would turn this bedtime story into a legend Willow Creek would never forget. The day of the solstice ritual arrived, and Willow Creek was alive with nervous energy. As the sun began to set, Sarah and I made our way to the town square, hand in hand. The Thompsons joined us, and soon it felt like the whole town was there, gathered in a circle around old Mabel. The elder stood in the center, her white hair glowing in the fading light. She began chanting in a language I didn't understand, sprinkling herbs and what looked like glowing dust into a small fire. The air grew thick with sweet-smelling smoke, and I felt a strange tingling in my fingertips. Suddenly, the fire flared up, casting dancing shadows across everyone's faces. Old Mabel's voice grew louder, and I felt a pull, like something was drawing words from deep inside me. Before I knew what was happening, I was speaking, pouring out feelings I didn't even know I had. "I was afraid," I heard myself say. "Afraid I wasn't enough for you, Sarah. That's why I worked so much, why I didn't see what was happening." Sarah gasped beside me, tears streaming down her face. "And I felt invisible," she replied, her voice shaking. "I thought you didn't want me anymore, so I looked for attention elsewhere, but it was all a mistake, a terrible mistake." Around us, other couples were having similar revelations. Tom and Lisa were embracing, whispering apologies and promises. Even old Mabel looked surprised at the power of what she'd unleashed. As we spoke, the fire seemed to pulse, growing brighter with each truth revealed. I felt something lifting from my shoulders, like a weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. The fire died down, leaving us all blinking in the twilight, feeling raw and exposed, but somehow lighter. Old Mabel smiled at us all, her eyes twinkling. "The magic of Willow Creek," she said softly, "is not in spells or potions. It's in the power of truth, of community, of love that endures even when tested." In the days that followed, the change in our town was palpable. People walked a little taller, smiled a little easier, Sarah and I found a new depth to our relationship, built on honesty and understanding. The Thompsons seemed to have rediscovered the spark that first brought them together. A year later, at the next summer solstice festival, Willow Creek was a different place. As I stood with Sarah, watching the fireworks explode overhead, I marveled at how far we'd come. The pain wasn't gone, I don't think it ever really goes away, but it had transformed into something that made us stronger, more compassionate. As the last firework faded, I overheard a young couple arguing nearby. The woman was accusing the man of flirting with her sister, while he defensively denied it. I caught old Mabel's eye across the crowd, and she gave me a knowing wink. For a moment, I wondered if the curse of the solstice was real after all, moving from couple to couple, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and grow stronger. But then Sarah squeezed my hand, and I realized it didn't matter. Whatever challenges came our way, we'd face them together, with the support of our wonderful, weird little town. As we walked home under the stars, I couldn't help but smile. Our story, Willow Creek's story, was far from over. But whatever twists and turns lay ahead, I knew it would be one heck of a tale to tell. After all, the best bedtime stories are the ones that never really end, but live on in the hearts of those who hear them. And so, as I drifted off to sleep that night, I wondered what new stories the next solstice might bring to Willow Creek. But that, my friends, is a tale for another time.